was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny S.Tee, and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Welcome. Today we'll be speaking with Phil Saunders, one of the founders of an organization called Path of Hope and Peace, which was started in 2014, the same year of my infamous trip that you heard about in our opening clip. At Peace with Penny, we believe in peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Why? Because it's the only future that'll work. We'll show you some examples of Israelis and Palestinians working together today in the West Bank, connections between peacemakers in the Israeli town of Tzur Hadassah and the Palestinian town of Hussan, friendships embracing the Palestinian village of Wadi Fukin and the Israeli city of Beitar Illit. Today, there are strong communities forging the way to what can be Israel's future. Curious? What happened in May during the skirmishes? We'll show you necessity can breed cooperation. Amen. So now I'd like to introduce to our audience at Peace with Penny, one of the founders of Path of Hope and Peace, Phil Saunders. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Penny. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. I'd like to begin with a clip that will give an overview of what Path of Hope and Peace is about. The first time I saw this clip, it brought tears to my eyes because if you look closely, you'll realize this is what peace looks like. And it's actually how these Israeli and Palestinians are living together today. You also have to remember it's difficult and tenuous, but it's working. So let's see the video. I'll stop a couple of times, and Phil, I'd like you to explain that what we're seeing when we're looking at the springs and then at the march. But let me now pull this up.
Hello everyone. Here we are at the entrance to the town of Hussan, a Palestinian town in the West Bank. And as we walk in, we can see that there's a red sign that warns Israelis that entrance to this Palestinian village could be dangerous for Israeli citizens. But the reality is that sign is out of date because a change has happened in this town. Over the course of years, from having been dangerous for Israelis in the intifadas, this is now a town where the signs are written in Hebrew. This is the puncturia, where you get your car punctures fixed. And if we look, we see Hebrew on almost all of the signs here because their livelihoods depend upon Israelis coming in and buying things. And now, if we look at these signs over here, the sign in black, white and yellow there, that says S.Tee Shalom. That's the car wash of peace. And underneath it, in white, this is written Kiosk Shalom. It's the kiosk of peace, where Israelis can come and buy everything cheaply, whatever they might need. And this is how we have it in Hussan now for many years. And we've built a robust coexistence that can even stand difficult periods such as what we've just gone through, where fires were burning all over the land. Here we were working together as a team to keep the peace and the coexistence going. And that's what we're seeing today, here at the end of May 2021. And by keeping the peace, we were able to get straight back to normality after the war. This was the first group to come and visit us already at the end of May. A mixed group of Jewish and Arab Israelis that came to visit the beautiful natural springs in the town of Hussan. And this is just the latest in many trips that we've been having to the town of Hussan.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Phil?
Sure. You want to talk about the springs or the war in May? Where should we start?
The springs first. The springs first.
Right. So the springs are a wonderful location in the valley beneath Hussan. Hussan is a mixture of commercial activity on the main street above and agricultural activity in the valley below. And they have multiple natural springs and plenty of water. And it's a wonderful location for everyone to visit. And my Palestinian partner Ziad, who we can see in the video there, who was flashing everybody, he realized that there was a great opportunity when the pandemic hit, because Israelis couldn't fly abroad like we normally do. And so he realized, hey, let's invite them to come and visit our springs and open up to tourism. And he posted a few pictures on a Facebook group, and a few of them responded, and a few brave souls came along, and they had a fantastic time. So they went home and told their friends and families about it, and more came. A trickle became a flood, especially when it was then featured in September 2020 on Channel 12 News in Israel. And so all of a sudden, ever since then, Israelis have been coming non-stop, especially weekends. There are busloads arriving, and,
Wow.
and so it's becoming a big tourism business. And this is one of the things that coexistence can achieve. When Israelis and Palestinians choose to work together, everyone benefits.
Wow.
This is just the latest in many trips that we've been having to the town of Hussan in recent months.
And these are Israelis?
Yep, that's a large group of Israelis.
Yachad is the Hebrew word for together. And in our neighborhood, Israelis and Palestinians work together to build coexistence.
And so what is this march about?
Okay, so this was the March of the Flowers on Jerusalem Day 2021. That was May the 10th, when all the tensions were building already, but the war hadn't actually started. The war began when at 6 o'clock local time, some rockets were then fired from Gaza, and then it all began big time. Up till then, there were tensions in Jerusalem and in various areas, but once rockets and military action began, then all the tensions blew up in mixed cities all over the land. And yeah, we had to work hard to retain what we'd built, the coexistence in our area. But what you're seeing there was a march of the flowers to try to calm things down. Everybody knew it was tense at that time, but it hadn't quite blown up yet.
So these are, obviously, I see the Arabic on the sign. I see the Hebrew on the sign. These folks are from Hussan and Tzur Hadassah. Is
What
that correct? Or
what you can see Ziad on the left.
right, I see that.
Around the corner from me, but the vast majority of everybody else came from all over the land to this march, and they were peacemakers of various kinds who wanted to stand together in solidarity at this difficult time. So that the sign there simply says Jerusalem against violence. So they knew that there was danger of violence happening. It was already starting to happen, and they wanted to take a stand.
Awesome. And let's finish the clip.
Yachad is the Hebrew word for together, and in our neighborhood, Israelis and Palestinians work together to build coexistence, both at difficult times when we need to stand together in solidarity, and at happier times when we can work together and learn new skills together and build peace for the benefit of generations to come.
Phil, what caused you to found Path of Hope and Peace?
Okay, so I moved to Israel in 2005, and I lived in Tel Aviv for a few years, and I was active in various organizations. I've always cared about peace. And then in 2013, we moved to a small place called Tzur Hadassah, which is right next to the Green Line, close to Jerusalem. And I discovered that I had fascinating neighbors in the area, Palestinians living just at the bottom of the hill, and also ultra-Orthodox settlers just on the other side as well. A lot of very interesting people and fascinating interactions. And I decided I had to meet everybody. And that began with starting to meet the Palestinians who live closest to us. And very soon I met Ziad, my partner, who remains to this day. The two of us are building a change in this area, along with many others now that have joined with us.
Yeah, and Ziad has quite an interesting background. Can you talk about that?
Definitely. Yeah, he has an amazing story. His story goes all the way back to when he was 15. He was born in 1972, and the first Intifada began when he was 15, when young adolescent lads have a tendency maybe to go out and do things to release the tensions that they were feeling. And Ziad was active in the Intifada, and until he was arrested, and he spent the next 5 years in jail. So from 15 to 20, he was in jail, and he grew up in Israeli jail, and he learned to speak Hebrew there, and he learned all kinds of other things from all of the other inmates that were there in the prison with him. And he also learned about the concept of peace. During that time, the Oslo Accords were proceeding, and so he started hearing about this and talking about it while in jail. And so when finally he came out, he and a few others that had been in jail together, they joined together with some Israelis who are against violence, and they created an organization called Combatants for Peace. And Ziad was responsible for the Bethlehem Jerusalem partnership.
Yes, I've interviewed Combatants for Peace. So, and if anyone's interested, you can find it on our website. Very interesting organization, all made up of people who have at one time opposed each other and today work on peace together. And it's fascinating. It's incredible and it's wonderful. So can you talk about what the Path of Hope and Peace is trying to achieve?
Sure, but let me just continue Ziad's story a little longer
okay.
first, to
Sure.
give the background, and then why the meeting of minds that we then had when I first met Ziad. First of all, it's worth mentioning when I lived in Tel Aviv, I was also in Combatants for Peace. I was in the Tel Aviv Tulkarim partnership, starting from 2010. But when I came to Tzur Hadassah and met Ziad, one of the first things he said to me is, wonderful to meet you. So glad that we could work together and whatever, but please stop talking about separating into two states. And this was already a big change in mindset for me, because I came from Tel Aviv, where generally speaking, we believe in separating away, cutting the land up. And he was saying, please, we don't want the land cut up. We don't want to be separated from you. We want to be have relations with you the way things used to be. And he also said, and that includes the settlers, which was a big eye-opener for me too, coming from Tel Aviv.
Can you explain that a bit? Because, you know, a lot of the listeners would be from the US who don't necessarily understand what exactly you're talking about.
Absolutely, and nor did I at the time. It was a real learning experience. So his story proceeded that while he was working for Combatants for Peace, he received a call from the head of Combatants for Peace to check out a demonstration that was happening quite close to where we live, in a town called Wallajeh, and apparently there were settlers there. And they asked Ziad to go and check out what was happening. So he headed down there, and he encountered a rabbi named Rabbi Menachem Froman. And he said, what are you doing here demonstrating against the separation wall? And Rabbi Froman responded that I'm standing with you guys. We don't want separation. We don't want walls in this land. We believe in living together, coexisting in this land. And for Ziad, this was something he'd never heard of. And then the rabbi invited Ziad to come to visit him in his home in a settlement. And Ziad was terrified, but the rabbi was so persuasive that he agreed, and he went along, and he was welcomed in with open arms and effectively became part of the family in due course. And then when, after having been there and met all the family and everybody else in that town, he then called up the head of Combatants for Peace and said, you're not going to believe what I encountered. Okay, there are these settlers that really want to work with us, and they've extended the hand of peace to me. And Combatants for Peace replied, we can't do that. That's not something we can be involved in, and if you're going to be involved in that, then you'll need to go a different path. And so what then happened was Ziad started working with Rabbi Froman and others, and they set up something called Land of Peace, and they worked together for years, building peace between neighbors in that area, until in 2013, Rabbi Froman unfortunately passed away. And that just happened to be the year that I arrived in Tzur Hadassah, and Ziad was looking for a new partner. And although I'm obviously a bit different to Rabbi Froman, at the end of the day, the vision really appealed. And so that's what we've been working on since. So really, it started with Ziad opening my eyes to the possibilities.
Great. And now can you get on with exactly what you're trying to achieve at Path of Hope and Peace?
Sure. Okay. So everything we are doing is very pragmatic and focused on building a better future together. And we've realized that we've got some fascinating variety of people in this area, each of whom has different things to offer each other. And when you bring those people together, it becomes an amazing win-win. And in this area, none of us have any interest in returning to the dark old days when Hussan in the Intifadas was known as one of the most violent towns in the entire West Bank. And it didn't pay off, not for us and not for them. Okay, and there are still quite a lot of people in my town who still remember Hussan as the town of terrorists. But thankfully, things have changed, and it's in all of our interests, and it's gone from strength to strength. And the key test was in May, when we saw all the problems all over the land, and yet, because we'd built something very strong together and didn't want it to fall apart, we worked together to keep the peace, and we were very successful. And so the video we saw earlier when I was speaking was at the end of May, where we'd managed to keep everything quiet, and that's the first trip that we saw heading down into the Springs. That was also at the end of May, so people just came straight back, and we got straight back and have carried on building stronger since.
So you have some tourism going on. You look at security conditions.
Yes.
You've got a women's group.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Okay, so of course, the relations have begun between the men, because the Palestinian men are the ones who speak Hebrew so that they can work. And the women, by comparison, it's a traditional Muslim town, so they stay more at home and they don't have so much interaction with Israelis. And so we're now working to change that and build relations between the Israeli women and the Palestinian women, and also between the young people. And so you saw a very brief clip at the end of the video where one of our partners in Path of Hope and Peace was teaching Palestinian kids art, and he also teaches them English, and it's wonderful. And so we're engaging everybody now, and we're also starting to engage with all the other towns in the zone to build a real zone of coexistence. But yeah, it began with security and economics, because they need to go hand in hand, because the Palestinians are looking for improvements in their quality of life, and the Israelis are concerned about security. And if we can work together on those two things and deliver them simultaneously, everyone wins. And so that was the key work to bring us to this situation that we now have today. So the real work began, I would say, in 2017 was when we really tackled the security situation and worked hard together to change it and put an end to stone throwing that was preventing Israelis from feeling safe enough to go into the town or even drive along the Hussan bypass, which doesn't enter the town but just goes close to it, the main road that leads to Jerusalem from this area, and they were too afraid to use it back then. Whereas today, there are frequently traffic jams on it because it's now again our main route to Jerusalem.
Yeah. Excuse me. Being a woman, of course, I wanted you to speak a little bit more about the meetings that the women have with each other, hosting the events and so on. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. Okay, so language is a key issue in this one. And so we've had to have facilitated translation when bringing them together. We do have Israeli Arabs, or Israeli Palestinians, as they often call themselves, who speak both Arabic and Hebrew, and therefore can be the connector. And yes, we are starting to run these groups to break the barriers of, they just don't know each other. They don't understand each other. The men have had much more interactions for quite a few years now, but it's vital that we enlist the women. As Ziad says, the women are the pillar of the house. And if we don't bring them into everything we're doing, and the youth, who, as I said, if the youth aren't part of it, they can go off the rails, and we want to all work together. So we're working as families, but with regard to the women specifically, often they prefer to meet just themselves together. They are traditional Muslim women, and so that's what we do.
It's interesting because most of the peace groups that I interview probably would say 80% of the peace activists are women. So it's interesting in your area that it's a bit different, but I'm sure they'll catch up.
Absolutely.
It's a natural nature of women, I believe, to do this kind of work. And congratulations. I understand in 2021, your group received the Institute of International Education's Victor J. Goldberg Prize for Peace in the Middle East. And it's an award that's given annually to a Jewish Israeli and an Arab Muslim that work together to advance the cause of peace in the Middle East. And you want to talk a little bit about the award you and Ziad won?
Yeah, it was an amazing honor. We did not expect to get anything like that. And yes, they were impressed that during this pandemic time, when the reality is a lot of peace activities fell by the wayside during this time because it's hard to get people together. And so many projects were put on ice, whereas thanks to Zia's ingenuity, instead, we ended up flourishing and had more Israelis coming to Hussan than ever before and featured on the news. And so it got quite a wide profile. And so they saw this and saw that we had really achieved something, especially when we passed through the war unscathed. The war was in May and we received the prize in June. And so, yes, it all came together and it's wonderful. And we're just wanting to build and deepen and widen the model that we've built now.
Okay, just for a little bit, I'd like to go back to your background because it's kind of fascinating. You're born in England and came to Israel like many people went to Israel from all over the world, but you went in 2005. And why did you go? You want to talk about meeting your wife and so on?
Sure. Okay. Yes. In many ways, it was all her fault because I grew up a British Jew in London, and I was living in London. I never particularly liked the weather in London, so I'd actually always dreamed of of living in the sunshine. But what happened was I was living in an apartment in the Jewish area of London. And one of the guys I was living with moved out to get married. And the other guy knew an Israeli girl who urgently needed a place to live. And so she arrived and, well, we liked each other. And soon we decided we didn't need the other flatmate. He's still never forgiven us. And then...
Bounced him out, eh?
No, we were more considerate of that. We moved out to another apartment just a little bit down the road, and then we talked about moving. We got married, both in London and in Israel. A civil ceremony in London and a religious ceremony in Israel, and then that was in 2003. And then we talked about moving to Israel. And actually, it wasn't my wife's fault in that regard because I was the one who'd had enough of British weather, and I said, "Go on, let's try it." And so we moved to Tel Aviv, and we had a wonderful time in Tel Aviv, and I started getting exposed to all these fascinating things. That it is an amazing land to live in. And then when we moved to Tzur Hadassah, then even more opened up. So that's the story of how I ended up getting into all this, not by design.
And I love the fact that Ziad, a Palestinian, taught you Hebrew, which he learned in jail.
Absolutely. The truth, when I arrived in Israel, I learned Hebrew in the Ulpan, like new immigrants do. And then when I started using Hebrew on the streets of Tel Aviv, I discovered But wow, I get better service in Tel Aviv when I speak English instead. Okay, people looked after me, were keen to help me, and whatever. So I just basically, I didn't use Hebrew at all until I arrived in this area. And then in order to speak to Ziad, I had to brush off my basic Hebrew. And I basically learned all the Hebrew I have today from Ziad, who, as you said, learned it in jail.
Yeah, there's, I mean, nuance takes on a very definitive term, I think, there. And you live near the West Bank, but not in the West Bank. And I believe your wife had something to do with that. Can you talk about why you chose to live near the West Bank, but not in the West Bank?
Okay, so she wanted to live closer to her family, who are in Jerusalem, but we also wanted to be still within reach of Tel Aviv. So we are in an area on the route towards Tel Aviv via Bet Shemesh, and so she found this location, and it's a wonderful location that she chose. I had no idea what we were going to be entering into, but that's why she chose it, because it is as close to the Green Line, but not actually across the Green Line. Yes, she wouldn't have felt comfortable living there, and at that time, nor would have I. Now, my whole perspective has changed since then, having met Ziad and settlers in this area, and the fact that we all work together to build a coexistent reality.
The point being, she didn't want to be a settler. She did not want to live in a settlement because
you're asking me because
you know, for people here, you know, I mean, I know, but what a settler means, what?
Okay, so
you're living in an area internationally regarded as what?
Yes. So as you say, they are considered to be illegal according to the international community. But the reality that I've seen on the ground is it's not black and white the way we think things are. None of us are monoliths. And so to simply view that there's a line and everything to the west of it is everything's great, and everything to the east of it is horrific atrocities or whatever, it's just not like that. And when I got to meet some of these settlers, I met a fascinating range of people, which included in our area, there's an ultra-Orthodox city, Beitar Illit, who have no interest whatsoever in politics. They just want to live their religious lives, and they're happy to coexist with anybody, the same way that Rabbi Froman in Tekoa was. And interestingly, when you go into Beitar Illit, you don't see any Israeli flags, whereas you do in my town on the west of the Green Line. We're Zionistic. They're not. They're just ultra-Orthodox. And so
yes, yeah, if we could stop for a minute for folks over here and let them absorb. We have extremely religious Jewish folks, Haredi Jews, who they're not Zionist. They don't necessarily believe in Israel. To them, they would call it, I would believe, Judea and Samaria, the biblical names. They would be much more comfortable than calling it Israel. And I just wanted to make the point of that. Because that is not what most people think of when they think of, you know, and it's true, most Jews totally love Israel, believe in Israel as a state, and being able to have Israel as a state is near and dear to our hearts. But it's really confusing and fascinating that we have some of the most religious Jews who could care less about that and don't even want to deal with that.
Right.
But that's
Absolutely. And
a
then
segment of Jews that you live near, not
yes.
necessarily the town where you live, but that's there as well.
Okay, and I believe you know the organization Roots, and you've interviewed
Yes, I do.
several. They're another amazing example of settlers and Palestinians coexisting. They're centered in the area of Gush Etzion, but they're expanding into other areas now as well, and they're doing magnificent work. And I also want to mention one doctor that lives in Efrat that I met very early, close to Gush Etzion, and he has a clinic where he invites Palestinians to come and get free healthcare on a purely voluntary basis to help his Palestinian neighbors get services they wouldn't be able to get by for the Palestinian healthcare authorities, which is very basic, unfortunately, some of the places. And so again, an example of a settler who is absolutely doing wonderful things to help Palestinians. Now, on the other hand, though, there are some settlers who are violent and do cause problems. It's a whole mix. And so the main message I would say in this is I learned that it's not black and white. The Palestinians aren't a monolith either. There are Muslims, there are Christians, there are seculars. Some of them have political concerns. Some of them say 1 state, 2 states, 10 states, we don't care, just as long as we can put food on the table for our families. There's a whole mix. And the same goes for all the people in this land. It's a fascinating.
Yes. And I have to say, Roots, I'm very tied to Roots. And Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger was the one of the first peace activists I ever met directly after our trip with Ali Abu Awad. They were here on a speaking engagement. And since I have interviewed, we have about 12 interviews from different people from Roots and doing wonderful, wonderful work there. But Rabbi Hanan is a settler, and he's also extremely Orthodox, but he also works on peace. And I would say that many Palestinians, he would consider them his family, and they do wonderful, wonderful work. So Israel is, of course, like anywhere else. You can't look at a label and assume you know what that person represents. For instance, just if they happen to be a settler, or they happen to be a Palestinian, or they happen to be a Jew. God knows we have so many denominations and seculars as well, and people are people. So you can't make assumptions, because we all know assuming something makes an ass out of you and me. So
Absolutely. And it's so true in such a fascinating land as this, where we have an assortment of tribes.
Okay, so you've got 3 major towns there that you deal with. So where you live is Tzur Hadassah, and it's a Jewish town, but what denominations and what's it like there?
Okay, so Tzur Hadassah is half secular and half modern Orthodox. And so we aren't settlers, as you said. We live west of the Green Line, and we focus on livelihoods. We have young families, and many of them work in Jerusalem. And so getting to work means driving along that road, which, as I said a few years ago, was not safe to use, but thankfully now is. And we just want to go about our lives. And what I discovered when I met the Palestinians in Hussan is basically the same thing, that they care very much about their families, and looking after them, putting food on the table for their family, and they need us to be coming in to buy their products. And also many of them work on a daily basis now in Israeli towns. And the interesting side of the triangle is Beitar Illit is the third corner of that triangle. And ultra-Orthodox families, they have big families and they don't have large income, so they need to be able to buy things cheaply. And a Palestinian town like Hussan, directly opposite them on the other side of that main road, is the perfect place to do so. So they are connecting. Beitar Illit connects very much to the commercial side of Hussan, whereas Tzur Hadassah is more connecting with the agricultural, cultural experience, going to the springs, getting to know the people. And so we all have different things that we care about, and that's fine. We all interact in different ways. And by the way, between Tzur Hadassah and Beitar Illit, there's also a very important relationship, because Tzur Hadassah doesn't have a bank or a post office or a pharmacy. All of those services are in Beitar Illit. So we're going in across the checkpoint regularly on a daily basis. So there's an interweaving. And the fact is that we're all very complementary. And it makes a whole greater than the sum of the parts.
So it's interesting to me now, we have religious Palestinians and we have religious Jews in Beitar Illit who, as you've described to me in the past, seem to have almost more of a connection in the way they think than perhaps the two Jewish towns of Tzur Hadassah and Beitar Illit. And there are concerns by the Beitar Illit that they don't necessarily want, for instance, Tzur Hadassah kids hanging out with theirs, because they might influence them in more of in thinking that they don't necessarily agree with more of a free thinking type way of looking at life. So can you talk a little bit about that? The potential for cultural issues is immense there, and yet you all make it work.
Yep, I agree. It's fascinating to see it working in action, and it's exactly as you described. Beitar Illit are religious, and they find it easier to be friendly with Palestinian religious Muslims than secular Jews like me, who might come with alternative ideas of how to be living life. And so it's fascinating that Hussan in many ways acts as the bridge of friendship in that triangle. And so we can be very friendly with people in Hussan because we're fascinated by them and their culture, and we're so grateful that they want to work with us now, and that we've moved past the years that really, according to the people who remember them in this town, I wasn't here at that time, but they say it was just terrible. And so they're thrilled that it's changed. And even some of them don't actually know why it's changed. They just know it's changed. They can see the differences, and everyone's benefiting from it.
So, but being a Palestinian still in Israel and Hussan, they have different restrictions compared to you, for instance, although you also have to go through checkpoints, but it's much easier. Can you talk about what it's like to be a Palestinian versus a Jew when you're talking about checkpoints and permits and so on? All that's going on as well.
Correct. So we are focused on building the coexistence where we can on a local area as a pilot project, effectively, to test how things could be done elsewhere as well. But yes, we haven't been able to change the systemic reality. And so, of course, a checkpoint is very easy for an Israeli to cross, but a Palestinian can't cross it unless they have a permit. And there are only certain checkpoints that Palestinians are allowed to use. And the one closest to us is one that Palestinians aren't generally allowed to use. So yes, there are real restrictions that do apply, but we work with the civil administration to make things more manageable for our Palestinian partners, and everyone in this area has benefited by the fact that now the army has recognized that, great, we're sorting things out in our own hands, and so they don't need to come in and deal with it here. They've got other problems and other areas that they need to deal with, so they go, and we've had an excellent relationship with the army. So, for example, just to be specific about that, in 2017, the way we stopped the stone throwing was we began by our Palestinian partners talking to the imams in the mosques and asking them if they can preach about non-violence, because the situation was basically, if somebody threw stones, the army would come and they would arrest that person, or maybe not even the right person. And then there might be a closure of the town, and everybody lost. And they reached the stage where they realized, why do we need this? And so they began by getting the imams to preach against violence and running patrols, particularly at night, to make sure nobody was throwing stones, coming up to the fence and throwing stones at Israelis, using the road down below. And then we realized, wow, there are actually people coming from other towns throwing stones. And if we're going to stop that, we really need to make it difficult for them to do it. So we went to the civil administration and we asked, can they set up bright white lights that will illuminate everywhere where stone throwing might happen, so that nobody can hide in a dark corner and throw stones? And as a combination of the imams and the patrols and the bright illumination, it all stopped in 2017. And in 2018, the civil administration gave a reward to the Palestinians in our area by inviting them to present their papers and get their names cleaned. Because if a Palestinian has been involved in violence of some kind or broken the law or whatever, then they get a black mark on their name. And that means they can't apply for a permit to work inside Israel. And it may be like somebody like Ziad, who was only 15 at the time, okay, and is now 50, okay, has totally different things he cares about. And so there are people still with these black marks from decades ago. So this was a big result for them to get that, and it gave them significantly enhanced freedom of movement, still subject to having a permit. So we need to be clear, we haven't got a magic wand that can instantly create equality in every way. But we hope that the improvements that we've created, which really is a win-win for everybody in our area, will become replicated eventually to perhaps become systemic. But that's a process.
Yeah, and there's so much economic reliance on each other between the towns. Tzur Hadassah can get cheaper foods and such just in Beitar Illit, but also Beitar Illit can even get cheaper foods and in the Palestinian towns, and it's you're all dependent on one another as part of the interactions, which obviously creates some of the unity. And you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, as you say, it's a win-win financially when we buy each other's products, but it's also, you get more variety. I can get different things in a Palestinian town, different food products than I can get in an Israeli town, whether that be Beitar Illit or Tzur Hadassah. And I'm not even just talking about traditional Palestinian foods. I'm talking about they get their products from a completely different distribution route. I believe it comes from the Gulf and Egypt, and whereas our distribution route is coming from Europe, and so different products end up, and we're living just next door to each other. So wonderful. So if we get used to actually going into each other's towns, we discover all the amazing benefits of different things you can find there. Plus, at the same time, you end up building good neighborliness. You get to know each other. And we really are now at the stage where we're becoming good friends. And not everybody, it's a process, but very much so. And as you say, there's no reason why we can't effectively become part of each other's families. Ziad was part of the Roman family in those years, and absolutely, Ziad is here all the time. He has a permit, okay, and I'm at his house all the time, and I know all of his family, and they're wonderful, fascinating. He's got 5 kids, every one of them different, and it's amazing to get to know these people, and it's a joy. Plus, by the way, I love Palestinian food as well. I'm an addict of maklouba in particular. It's amazing.
So now I would have called you a peace activist before speaking with you, but you don't like that term. You prefer that you're a coexistence builder. Can you talk about what that means to you?
Yeah, okay. It's not that I don't like the idea of peace activist. I just don't think it actually really describes so well what we do in this area. There are many ways of doing things, and there are fantastic organizations out there that do all kinds of things. But yeah, what we're focused on is about building coexistence from a pragmatic basis, and then working from that, because we've seen it's very strong when everyone's benefiting and has something to lose, crucially, then we can pass through difficult times like the war in May more strongly than other relationships that are maybe more just about talking about the politics or narratives, all of which is very important. But we focus on the pragmatics. We realized that at the end of the day, the deal at the beginning began economics and security, and then from that we can now build everything else on top of that from a much stronger foundation, where everybody in our area is already benefiting from the change in reality. So that's why I choose to say that we're focused on building coexistence. But yeah, it's part of building peace, and we very much do hope that it will become peace across the entire land.
Your attitudes are traveling a bit, and can you talk a little bit about the relationships going on in Wadi Fukin with Beitar Illit?
Sure. Okay, so Wadi Fukin is a smaller Palestinian town, which is the one closest to Tzur Hadassah, and they have good relations with Tzur Hadassah, but not with Beitar Illit. And partly because Beitar Illit are settlers, and they have felt it's inappropriate. And there are many other Palestinian towns out there who feel they shouldn't be working with settlers, and that they'd be accused of normalization, normalizing the conflict, the occupation, etc. Whereas Hussan is a fascinating town in terms of the fact that they're large enough and strong enough that they effectively are charting their own course. And in 20 years ago, that was a course of violence, and they were a strong symbol of resistance. Now, perhaps because they were such a strong symbol of resistance back then, they have the kudos and the name strong enough to actually blaze a different trail. And we very much hope that other towns in this area and elsewhere will want to emulate, and it's already starting. Okay, but we need to be respectful of the differences. And Hussan, as I said, is half commercial and half agricultural. Wadi Fukin is almost entirely agricultural. And so they have less at the moment to gain from commercial relations. So they're more interested just in the cultural relations, which Tzur Hadassah is interested in, but Beitar Illit, that's less so. And so, okay, every town has to choose. Every town has a different identity, and we respect that completely. And it's all part of the fascinating mix.
How would you defend Hussan saying that they aren't normalizers? Well, you have your own version of why you feel they shouldn't be considered normalizers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, as we understand the term normalization, it means cementing and accepting the status quo. That means getting along fine whilst accepting the reality. And what we're doing is not accepting the reality. We have realized that if we choose to work constructively together, we can change the reality to a much better new reality. So it's not normalizing the status quo at all. Okay, it is simply deciding to work together in a cooperative manner that benefits everybody and solves the problems. Most of what we do at the end of the day is focused on solving problems. And so there was a fascinating example of sewage. Not the nicest subject to discuss, sewage, but nevertheless,
Necessary.
it's an important one. And the reality is the Palestinian towns in our area don't have access to sewage pipes. The way we don't need to think about sewage. They have to collect it in a pit or somewhere, and then the trucks come round and collect it up, and then have to deposit it somewhere. And they used to go miles away from this area to a location where they would then dump it, and that's not great environmentally. And whereas Beitar Illit as a sophisticated sewage infrastructure. And great, when we struck up these relations, then we realized, oh, okay, so maybe we can start using, the Palestinians can use that infrastructure. And so again, a deal was struck to make that happen. And we're now talking about a much wider solution, which will require infrastructure. So this is for years going ahead. But yes, once again, if we work together, we can, at the end of the day, we share an environment, and we have to live together in it and work out these problems together. And so
Hussan used to be, when a Palestinian town works only with other Palestinians, they're very dependent on, for instance, the PA. But now with Hussan's relationship with Israelis, you would describe it as having a leg in both camps. You want to talk about how that strengthened Hussan as well? Another way that they've been strengthened by the relationships?
Yeah, they are definitely much more empowered now than probably ever before, because again, if you can work with everybody, and that is very much part of our model. And so again, in terms of peace organizations that we work with, we want to work with the entire spectrum. Okay, we don't have red lines. No, we don't work with settlers, or we don't work with people who are very critical of Israel. We work with everybody. Okay, and in the same way, that's the decision that Hussan made, to work with everybody. So let's be very clear, they're not working against anybody. And the wonderful thing is that we've discovered is that the authorities are very happy to let that happen. Because, as I said, the army have no need to be entering into an area where they're not needed. And in the same way, the PA has no problems whatsoever. We've met them. I've been there, so they know about what we do, and we're very keen that they know and endorse it, and that therefore it's a new model that we can all learn from. So,
Well, one of the things, we've talked a lot about, there's so many benefits to everyone working together that result in just the way we would wish the area and all the world to live in peace. And even during May, which was obviously a time period of violence and contention, etc. There were the arguments about Sheikh Jarrah, and all kinds of things were going on, and people were upset. I wanted to show, which I thought was fabulous, that you actually, here we have this town, and we can see, I would like to show some of the videos from the Hussan's entrance during that time and what exactly was happening. It's fascinating. So the first video I'm gonna put up and then play, and if you could
Okay, the
talk about
morning
that.
of the 11th of May, and they've closed off the area with lots of Israelis and Palestinians caught, unable to move. Everybody is aggravated, it's closed off, and they say they can't do anything. They've been given an order not to let anybody out, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians, and everybody is getting angry. And people are trying to talk and explain it, and you can see here there are people, and there's no logic to this at all. The entrance to Hussan.
So that was one issue that was going on, but by the next day, this is a different situation.
So it's 10:20 in the morning on the 12th of May 2021, and this is the entrance of Hussan after a very, very tough day and night of violence. But things are quiet here. We do have 3 soldiers there at the entrance keeping an eye on things, but they allowed me to drive in, and they're allowing people to come in and out. But as you can imagine, not too many people are coming in and out at the moment. Israelis and Palestinians get nervous of each other at times like this, but here in this town, it's okay, and we're keeping things going. Hang on, let's see. Here's a Palestinian driving in. Let's see what they say to me. No? Okay, let's drive in, no problem. And that's a yellow number plate. That's somebody driving out. Let's see. That angle, that's the yellow Israeli number plate. No problem. So, okay, the coexistence is continuing here in the town of Hussan. And over there, that's Beitar Illit. Everything seems quiet. Let's hope it stays that way.
So just absolutely beautiful. And it's amazing what can happen when folks work together. When you were talking about the license plates, I mean, I know, but you mentioned the yellow license plates were the Israelis, and when you said, well, here's a Israeli and here's a Palestinian, you're doing this by the license plates. the color of the license plates, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
That
And
if you can explain that a little bit.
certainly. Okay, so the Israelis have yellow number plates and Palestinians have white number plates, but there are areas where they can intermingle. Area C is area where Israelis and Palestinians can both use the same roads and enter towns that are in Area C, and so that's what we were seeing in that those two videos in two very different situations, one the day after the other. Okay, so the first one was on the 11th of May, when the war had started, and presumably the army had decided in general that they needed to take control of everything. So this was a general order, okay, to close off towns that might be problematic or whatever. And so they arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning, as they did in other areas. But the difference in our town is we have Israelis going in and out all the time in Hussan. Okay, and so when they closed off the town, there were dozens of Israeli cars caught, locked inside this town, plus lots of Palestinian cars that wanted to leave. So you can actually see a whole mixture of yellow and white number plates all mixed in together there, and they were arguing with the soldiers to be let out. But I spoke to them and they said, no, look, we've received this general order. Okay, and so I thought, look, this is going to get a big mess, and this is not what we want here. Tensions are rising. We don't want violence to happen. And then an Israeli car decided to make a bolt for it and just drove straight past the soldiers. And I thought, wow, what will happen if a Palestinian car decides to have a go at doing that? And we just thought, no, we don't want to get that. Okay, so I called up my contacts at the administration, the army administration in Gush Etzion, and I put them on the phone to some of the angry Israelis who'd been stuck there for half an hour and wanted to get home or get to work or whatever. And they yelled at them enough that in the end, the people realized, okay, we better do something. It's a bit of an unusual circumstance there. So then the officer in charge at the entrance got the order, open it up, let them out. And so from then on, they were there keeping an eye on things, at least for the next few days. As it happens, after about the 14th or something, they weren't there at all. Okay, but already on the 12th, we saw that they were there and they were allowing things to carry on. And then it just slowly got back to normal. As the war progressed, we were actually readjusting and just getting back to normality very quickly. And so that's why we passed through it unscathed. But again, it's because we have these relationships that we've built. And so that's what you were saying.
It shows that peace works, you know, that it works. And it's fabulous. Do the politicians in the area stay out of your business, or how do you navigate that?
Well, the amazing thing is we haven't had to navigate it. We are starting to meet politicians now. People are getting quite interested in what's happened in our area. You know, how did we pass through that incredibly tense time so much more easily than other areas of the land? And so, yes, we've had a lot of interesting meetings. But as I said, even before, they never interfered, and so yeah, there were lots of people who felt, oh, you know, are we going to get into trouble for doing this? The answer apparently seems to be no. Okay, so I have no complaints about the way we've been handled in general. They've let us get on with it, and so yes, it's possible to do. So we've just taken the opportunity and run with it.
Well, as your last question, I wanted to ask you, how would you want your area to be remembered? What do you want people to know about the results of your work, that you're able to live in peace?
Okay, so I would simply say, peaceful coexistence absolutely is possible. Secondly, Hussan, of all towns, used to be the poster child for violent resistance. And if they can change the whole way to now be a poster child for coexistence, that really says a strong message that anything's possible if you've just got the will and the willingness to work at it and make it happen by dealing with some problems and finding the win-win. And we really, truly believe that if it can happen in our area, it can happen in other areas. I'm not saying that every area is exactly the same, as each area has its own special characteristics. So it would have to be tailored to whatever they need. But the principle is that complementary natures does not have to be contradictory natures. We can coexist in this land very nicely as a rainbow of colors, maintaining our identities. Because the whole point about being complementary is that we each keep our identities. We're not blurring our identities, we're benefiting from the diversity. And so this is very much part of the model that we've got here. And yes, we believe it could probably apply to the rest of the land. And who knows, maybe it's relevant to other areas in the world as well, but that's down to the rest of the world to think about.
Fabulous. So thanks so much, Phil, for letting our audience know about the real work of cooperation that you are having between these three extremely different towns. Next week, we're going to do something we haven't done before. First, let me stress that we are not a political vodcast and we are not supporting these particular ideas nor any other, but as always, we're willing to listen. We're always interested in what's happening in Israel, and politics are certainly part of the many proposals working on peace, and we thought it'd be thought-provoking to speak with Israel Pikarsh, the CEO of an organization called Anachnu. They call their proposal the Equal Partners Program and say it's based on a win-win principle. All political groups within Israel will be strengthened together, as well as the state of Israel and the Palestinians, without any side leaving its fate in the hands of the other. They call for the establishment of a separate Palestinian state within the 67 borders with a safe Jewish minority, alongside the establishment of a federal Jewish and democratic constitution in Israel with an enlarged and equal Palestinian minority. Their federal approach recommends the forming of non-territorial constitutional communities which would provide religious and cultural services in Israel. Sounds complicated, right? Well, of course it is. We're talking about Israel, and they've struggled to give peace a chance for years. Why not join us and see what Anachnu is proposing? Israel needs a creative solution to resolve so many complex issues. We have to remember that you can't expect different results if you always propose the same solutions. We hope you'll join us and give this solution a chance to be heard. And for now, may you all live in peace, shalom, and salam.